Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. You might be wondering what I'm doing with a basket full of washing that has tomatoes in it. Well, guess what? We're making sauce. These are the tomatoes that I've picked from our veggie patch out the back. I kind of grow a little bit too many every year. So these ones are absolutely enormous. I'm getting tomatoes. These are, I don't know, these are insane. So this is just a regular size tomato. I weighed them today at the regular size. They're about 80 to 90 grams. And these great big tomatoes are nearly 500 grams or half a kilo. So absolutely insane. What I do is chop them up. Sometimes I'll just chop them up and put them into a freezer bag and stick them in the freezer, and then I'll cook them in winter. This time round I'm actually going to chop all these up and make a homemade tomato sauce, which I use in Bolognaise, lasagna, chicken cacciatore, all sorts of tomato based meals, even tomato soup. So I'll stick around, I'll chop all these up and put them in a pot, a big one. I've got a mammoth task ahead of me and I've got a great big pot. So this is the one I like to use for doing most of my sauces. When I used to do jams as well, I use a great big heavy pot. So I'm going to get ready and chop up all the tomatoes. I'm just going to put them in the pot, put a heap of salt in there and cook it all for the next couple of hours. When I make sauce, I actually use all of the tomato except the stalk. I don't use that bit in the middle. So I'll use the skin, I'll use the seeds, everything goes into the pan, cook it up for a couple of hours. Once all that's nice and mushy, I'll let the pan cool down and then I'll blend it all. So rather than blending everything now and getting all the seeds and all of that chopped, I'm going to do it later on after it's cooked. I'll get the flavour out of the skin, out of the seeds, out of the flesh of the tomato, everywhere. And by blending it later after the whole lot's cooked, I'm not going to have bitterness from the seeds coming through. So stick around, watch me chop up all these tomatoes and put them in a pot, and then we'll cook them. Now any green bits are usually a little bit hard. I'm just going to chop that straight off. So any bits of the tomato that don't look good, I'm going to cut off as well. And just make sure there are no bugs in them as well. And if they're really big, I'll chop them up a bit smaller. So you get the gist of it. Tomatoes in the pot, over to the stove. Now don't need to put any water in the pot either because there's enough water in the tomatoes. So I'm just going to fill this pot up. I did forget to mention, most of the time when you're cooking tomatoes, you'll actually buy a sauce tomato, like the Roma tomatoes. They're really, really good for saucing. But just because these aren't a sauce tomato doesn't mean I can't make sauce with them. Really doesn't matter what you use. I got 50 kilos of the little tiny cherry tomatoes last year. I just stuck them in the freezer the way they were and they're still there. And I just put them into sauces whenever I need to use them. So it doesn't matter what kind of tomato you've got, you can sauce them. Okay, that is it. That's all of the tomatoes. I think this is a 10-litre pot, so there's quite a few tomatoes in here. Yeah, quite a few. All right, what I'm going to do now is put this on the stove. As I said before, I don't need to put any water in here, but I do need to put some salt. So I've just got some salt crystals and a generous sprinkling of salt. There's quite a lot of tomato in here. So that's all I'm doing, salt and tomatoes. Now, I'm not doing, if you wanted to, you could go and add garlic, basil, oregano, some more spices if you want to, or some other herbs. I'm leaving this exactly as it is because if I'm doing a sauce-based dish, I want to have the option later on of adding chili or the basil or the oregano or garlic to a dish. So if I keep this as pure as I can and just add the salt, then I can do anything with this sauce later on. Once it's all cooked up and pureed, it'll end up going into the freezer. So it's a great way of storing it without having to have jars that you've got to sterilise and then find a cupboard space to put it. So all of these will end up going into the freezer after it's cooled down. I'm going to start cooking. So I'm just going to let that heat through, and then once it's heated through, then I'll just put it on a really low heat and cook that for the next hour and a half or so. Once it's all nice and mushy, then I can let it cool down and then put it through the blender and mix it to a pulp. The tomato mix has cooked really well and I've let it cool down, so it's completely cool and I'm ready to put it through the blender now, or a mixer, whatever you like, that's going to mix it to a sludge. And I need to actually transfer this to a couple of other pots just in the meantime because I need to reuse this. So I'm just going to put the mixed tomatoes into that glass jar. First of all, what we want to do is pour some contents into here. Now, remember I said earlier, I blend everything, the seeds, the skin, all the flesh of the tomato. I have in the past just gone and pushed it through a sieve and left the seeds and the skin out, but there's so much good nutrients there that I think it's really wasteful not to use it. And by cooking it, I'm getting rid of the bitterness in the seeds as well. Okay, now for the fun part. So that's all, it just takes a few seconds. The other thing, by keeping the seeds and the skin, you're actually creating a really nice thick sauce. Otherwise, all you're going to have is just red, runny tomato sauce. Pour that into the bowl. And we're going to cook this again. And continue. That's all done, so everything's been blended or processed, and I'm ready to put everything back into this pan, into this pot. So what we'll be doing now, pour everything back in, put it back onto the stove. I'll probably cook it for another hour and a half or so, and then the sauce is done. All I need to do is cool it and bag it up for the freezer. And the reason I didn't pour from the pot straight into this container earlier is because it's really thick and it splashes everywhere, so I didn't want to have tomatoes all over the place. So it was easier just to use the ladle. So now for the fun part. Rightio, the whole lot's been processed, ready to go back on the stove. I'll pop that back on low. I'll bring it to the boil and then pop it on low and just simmer it for about an hour and a half. Keep on stirring it as you go because it's quite a thick mixture now. All the sediment will go to the bottom and you don't want that to burn. So bring it to the boil, really low heat for the next hour and a half and stir it. The tomato sauce has finally cooled down. It's cooked for a couple of hours on the stove after being pureed. I'm ready to put it into freezer bags now and then store it in the freezer until I need them. So what I like to do is, rather than using preserving jars or bottles and having to wash them, sterilise them and then find a pantry to put them in, it's easier for me to store them in the freezer. Now I just use small freezer bags. And these are some that I've done earlier, or a couple of days ago. So just put them into freezer bags, throw them in the freezer and put a label on them and date them, and then just pull them out when you need to. So one of my recipes I've got, I just put the whole frozen block in the stove and let it melt down and then cook my sauce with it. So what I do is fill the bags up and pop them into a plastic container, and I stick them beside each other. So just like this, and I prop them up into usually a taller container, but I've run out. Prop them up like this, and then they can sit right next to each other. I can get a whole stack of them, put them into the freezer, and then once they're frozen solid, I can take them out and separate them and then just lay them in the freezer. So that's just the way I do it. So for now, what we're going to do is just pop them in a bag. If you've got containers that you want to use in the freezer, go for it. I use all my containers to do the dog food. So all we need to do now is pour the contents. It's a little bit messy. I should probably actually put it into a jug and then pour that straight into the bag. So however much you want to put into these bags is what you'll do. Just get as much air out of it as you can and just sit that just there. As you build up your bags, you'll be able to stand them up a little bit better. And I will get a jug. So thanks for the idea. If nothing else, it's just going to be a little bit quicker. And that's it. So just keep on filling up the bags until you're ready to put them into the freezer. Label them with a date, and I'm going to keep on going here. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope your sauce works out. Let me know how you go. See you next time.